Neil Armstrong said, look, you know, if I were to go forward and talk about what actually happened, I've been told. Neil Armstrong said this to us, that my wife, my children, and my grandchildren would all be, that they would take us out somehow, some terrible accident. And he says, I'm not going to talk about it.
Here is an extract from the original press release. NASA scientists and engineers participating in exploration of Mars and the Moon reported the results of their discoveries at a briefing at the Washington National Press Club on March 21, 1996. It was announced for the first time that man-made structures and objects had been discovered on the Moon. The scientists spoke rather cautiously and evasively about these objects, with the exception of a UFO. They always mentioned that man-made objects are possible and stated the information was still under study and official results would be published later. It was mentioned at the briefing that the Soviet Union used to own some photo materials proving the presence of such activity on the Moon. And although it wasn't identified what kind of activity it was, thousands of photo and video materials from the Apollos and the Clementine space station showed many parts on the lunar surface where this activity and its traces were perfectly evident. The video films and photos made by U.S. astronauts during the Apollo program were demonstrated at the briefing. People were extremely surprised why the materials hadn't been presented to the public earlier. NASA specialists answered, it was difficult to forecast the reaction of people to information that some creatures had been or still are on the Moon. In addition, there were some other reasons to it, which were beyond the control of NASA. Specialist for lunar studies Richard Hoagland says that NASA is still trying to alter photo materials before being published in public catalogs and files. They do some retouching, or are partially refocusing them while copying. Some investigators, Hoagland is among them, suppose that an extraterrestrial race had used the Moon as a terminal station during their activity on the Earth. These suggestions are confirmed by the legends and myths of different nations of our planet. The ruins of lunar cities stretch for many kilometers. Huge domes on massive basements, numerous tunnels, and other constructions cause scientists to reconsider their opinions concerning the Moon. How the Moon appeared and the principles of its revolving around the Earth still pose a significant problem for scientists. Some partially destroyed objects on the lunar surface can't be placed among natural geological formations, as they are of complex organization and geometrical structure. In the upper part of Rima Hadley, not far from where the Apollo 15 had landed, a construction surrounded by a tall, D-shaped wall was discovered. As of now, different artifacts have been found in 44 regions. The NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and the Houston Planetary Institute are investigating the regions. Mysterious, terrace-shaped excavations of rock have been discovered near the Tycho crater. The concentric hexahedral excavations and the tunnel entry on the terrace side can't result from natural geological processes. Instead, they look like open-cast mines. A transparent dome raised above the crater edge was discovered near the crater Copernicus. The dome is unusual, as it is glowing white and blue from the inside. A rather unusual object, which is unusual indeed even for the Moon, was discovered in the upper part of the factory area. A disk of about 50 meters in diameter stands on a square basement, surrounded by walls. In the picture, close to the rhomb, we can also see a dark, round embrasure in the ground, resembling an underground Caponier entry.
And so we reached out to him and invited him to come to those events, and he politely declined and told us that it was made very clear to him and the other Apollo astronauts who witnessed this first event, where when we landed at the crater on the Moon, the rim at the top of the crater was, quote, crowded with UFOs, craft that were up there, multiple of them, and that these were filmed. I know people personally who've seen that film.
There is a rectangular area between the factory and the crater Copernicus, 300 meters wide, 400 meters long. Apollo 10 astronauts took a photo of a 1-mile-long object called Castle, which is at the height of 14 kilometers and casts a distinct shadow on the lunar surface. The object seems to consist of several cylindrical units and a large conjunctive unit. The internal porous structure of the castle is clearly seen in one of the pictures, which gives the impression that some parts of the object are transparent. As it turned out at the briefing where many NASA scientists were present, when Richard Hoagland had requested originals of the castle pictures for the second time, no pictures were found at all. They disappeared, even from the list of pictures made by the Apollo 10 crew. Only intermediate images of the object were found in the archives, which unfortunately don't depict the object's internal structure.
So we did go to the moon, but some of the footage, it doesn't make sense because the flag is moving. Now, the reason for that, and this is where people say we didn't go to the moon, it was all hoax and filmed in a basement up in New York. The truth is we went, but during the lunar orbiter, going back before the Apollo mission, we actually were circling the Earth taking the first early digital photographs. And as you know from the testimony of Disclosure Project witness Carl Wolf, there were structures on the moon that were artificial. Some were newer and some were very ancient. And so they knew the covert programs, and these images were being downloaded to out here at Langley, and not the CIA headquarters, Langley Air Force Base, to a compartmented operation run by the National Security Agency that was then sequestered away from the other NASA scientists. But the people running that project, the deep black people in those projects, knew that it was likely we were going to encounter something not of this world or a UFO when we landed. Therefore, they had filmed some footage that they could splice in if something started happening. So during the live transmission, if something started happening, there's a delay that went through this National Security Agency filter, and they could immediately, instantly put in. And that's why there's a couple frames where the American flag is moving. Well, there's no atmosphere on the moon, okay? Which was the one mistake they made in that whole plan. That's the telltale giveaway.
When the Apollo 12 crew landed on the lunar surface, they saw that the landing was observed by a half-transparent pyramidal object. It was hovering just several meters above the lunar surface and shimmered with all the rainbow colors against the black sky. In 1969, when the film about astronauts traveling to the Sea of Storms was demonstrated, the astronauts saw the strange objects once again, which were later called striped glasses. NASA finally understood what consequences such kind of control could bring. Astronaut Mitchell answered the question about his feelings after his successful return. My neck still aches as I had to constantly turn my head around because we felt we were not alone there. We had no choice but to pray. Johnston, who worked at the Houston Space Center and studied photos and video materials made during the Apollo program, discussed the artifacts with Richard Hoagland and said that the NASA leadership was awfully annoyed with the significant number of bizarre, to put it mildly, objects on the moon.
And so when they stepped out, of course, and we're approaching actually, before they even landed, they saw them. So they were already with this sort of pre-prepared film that looked very, very good, except for this one error. And so Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin know for a fact. Now, Neil Armstrong said, look, if I were to go forward and talk about what actually happened, I've been told, Neil Armstrong said this to us, that my wife, my children, and my grandchildren would all be killed, that they would take us out somehow, some terrible accident. And he says, I'm not going to talk about it. Now, Buzz Aldrin has just basically, he sort of had a nervous breakdown after this and was actually at an Air Force facility. I know a man that was there with him, and he confided that this is also what happened. I also know Buzz Aldrin's sister, who pulled me aside and says, yes, you're absolutely right. That is what happened, but it's not my job to out Buzz Aldrin on this. If he's ready and he's able and allowed, he will speak about it. But you have to understand enormous pressure was put on these men, never to speak about what actually happened.
It was even said that piloted flights to the moon might be banned. Investigators are especially interested in ancient structures resembling partially destroyed cities. Photos reveal an astonishingly regular geometry of square and rectangular constructions. They resemble our cities seen from the height of 5 to 8 kilometers. A mission control specialist commented on the pictures. Our guys observed ruins of the lunar cities, transparent pyramids, domes, and God knows what else, which are currently hidden deep inside the NASA safes, and felt like Robinson Crusoe when he suddenly came across prints of bare feet on the sand of the desert island. What do geologists and scientists say after studying the pictures of lunar cities and other anomalous objects? They say that such objects can't be natural formations. We should admit, they are artificial, especially the domes and pyramids. Reasonable activity of an alien civilization showed up unexpectedly close to us. We were not ready for it psychologically, and some people hardly believe they are true even now.
Now, one of the things that Neil Armstrong was overheard saying, and this was reported in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, is that Neil Armstrong stated that we were essentially warned off the moon. That, in other words, these civilizations did not want us going to other moons or planets to colonize them with the consciousness of nationalism and the Cold War. Because remember, the Apollo project was really a proxy for the Cold War. The United States was in a complete panic when Sputnik overtook our space program, the Soviets. And so the race to the moon was part of, and always was part of, the military competition between two huge superpowers, the old Soviet Union and the United States of America. And so when we went there, but we went there not as a peaceful world civilization, but as a competing Cold War effort that were armed with thousands of thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, pointed at each other. That was not the consciousness that the ETs want to see us going into space with. They want us going into space with the consciousness of peace and cooperation, not militarism and war. So that's sort of your, let's say if there's an entry ticket to space exploration, that's the main one. And we haven't quite reached that point, have we?